At my son's wedding, my new daughter-in-law raised her glass and said, "This is the fat pig we have to put up with." She introduced me to her rich family. Laughter rippled through the table, sharp and bright like glass about to crack. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My suit was old, my tie a little faded, the one my late wife once chose for me. Then her father turned to look at me and the color drained from his face. His hand froze mid-toast. "You," he whispered, "you're Henry Whitaker from Meridian Capital." And just like that, the room fell silent. They called me invisible for years, which turned out to be great preparation for what was coming. If you're watching this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. For a heartbeat, the orchestra kept playing as if nothing had happened, the violinist sliding into a note that trembled in the air and went nowhere. A waiter paused beside our table holding a tray of sparkling wine that jittered in its flutes. The chandeliers over the Beaumont Pavilion threw rings of light across polished marble. I felt it all as if through glass. Nora still smiled into her raised glass, expecting another round of laughter, something easy and cruel. Her friends leaned forward the way people do when they think they are in on a joke. I lifted my own glass so the ceremony masters would not rush in to rescue me. The tie at my throat carried the faint scent of cedar from a drawer that had been closed for years. Helen had picked this tie for an anniversary dinner at a small restaurant with gingham curtains and a piano that was always a little out of tune. I remembered her fingers making a quick knot and smoothing it against my shirt with a smile that said, "Wear this when you need reminding." I felt the knot now, and let the memory do its quiet work. Nora lowered her glass first when she noticed her father had gone pale. Charles Beaumont was a man who wore his suits like armor, and who liked being the loudest person in any room. He was not loud in this one. He stared at me, then at his daughter, then back to me, as if the lights had suddenly shifted and shown him a shape he had missed. The orchestra leader flicked a hand, and the music softened. Charles breathed in as if for the first time all night. My son Ethan stepped between us with a grin that felt forced at the edges. He was flushed from dancing, handsome and hopeful, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned in the easy style of a man who believed happiness was a straight road. He did not hear what Charles had said. He only sensed that something had tilted. "Dad looks good tonight," he told the table and patted my shoulder. Then he guided Nora away for a photo. She let herself be pulled, but her eyes never left her father. A woman at the neighboring table leaned toward me with a kind smile and whispered that her daughter also loved vintage ties. The word vintage landed softly, careful as a hand on a banister. I thanked her. It was a kindness I did not need but welcomed anyway, like a light pocketed for later. Charles finally crossed the small distance between us. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it. "Is it you, Henry Whitaker? Meridian Capital, Beaumont Industries." His lips barely shaped the names. He was asking and remembering at the same time. I looked at him and gave him nothing, because giving nothing was still giving him time to decide how he wanted the story to sound when he repeated it. He swallowed, turned to the MC, and asked for a second to propose a toast. The MC, delighted that a man of standing wanted the microphone, hurried over. The band quieted to a hush. The garden doors stood open, and the last of the afternoon light slid in along the floor like a path. To my daughter and to Ethan, Charles began. His voice steadied because it had practice. "Marriage is a promise to see one another clearly. It is also a promise to care for the families that raised us." He raised his glass and glanced at me as if the next line had been written on my face, and he was deciding whether to read it aloud. Then he cleared his throat and finished with something safe about health and joy and long lives. The applause felt off-tempo. People clapped because they had been taught to clap when a microphone stops. Nora drifted back to her father with a whisper that carried further than she intended. "What was that? Did you forget your line?" Charles did not answer. He kept watching me with that look of recognition that men wear when a DIL from their past steps out of the shadows and takes a chair at their table. I had seen that look before in conference rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows and polished water pitchers that reflected the city like a fever dream. It is the look of a man running 2 columns in his head. What I thought I knew. What might be true, I let my gaze wander over the room so no one would think I was waiting for anything. The flowers ballooned over crystal vases. The ice sculpture caught the light and held it. I watched photographers angle couples beneath arches so the evening would look like a magazine later. At one corner table, a cousin checked sports scores on his phone with the posture of a boy hiding a comic book under a desk. In the reflection of a mirror, I saw myself standing alone and I did not mind it. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me from across the dance floor. He was laughing at something Nora said to the photographer, and then he was not laughing at all. He started toward me, then stopped when the coordinator asked him to sign a guest book shaped like a tree. His pen scratched leaves for names while he looked up at me again. I lifted 2 fingers and he smiled without ease. Nora decided the room needed rescuing and did it the way she rescued every conversation that drifted away from her. She slid an arm around Charles and brought him into a new knot of guests where she could control the light. She introduced me again with a sugary brightness that did not quite stick. "This is my father-in-law. He is retired. He keeps things simple." She let the word simple sit with a small smirk. No one laughed this time. People can smell a second cruelty. It never tastes as fresh as the first. Charles did not laugh either. He said nothing about retirement. He watched me the way a diver watches the surface before deciding how deep the water goes. He excused himself from his own daughter and walked toward the terrace. I followed a minute later because the room needed air. Outside, the night had settled over the hills like a quiet animal. The estate stretched into dark lawns where lanterns burned in tidy lines. Crickets sang in the hedges. The sky wore a ribbon of cloud that looked stitched by hand. Charles waited by the railing with one hand flat on the stone. His glass stood untouched. I stepped beside him and let the silence do what it is best at. He spoke first. "It has been 3 years." His voice had dropped the performance. 3 years ago, a firm with a soft name saved my company from my mistakes. I never knew the face behind it. I thought it was better not to know. He stared into the hedges and laughed once, a sound without joy. Maybe it was easier to hate an idea. "I do not hate you," I said. "I do not love you either. The company is not the thing between us." He nodded. "Then why are you here?" "Because my son loves your daughter," I said. "And because your daughter thinks I am something I am not." He flinched as if that last line had been meant for him. "She is young," he said. "Youth forgives itself very fast." I turned my glass so the light would not catch his eyes. Youth is not an excuse to carve people up for sport. The line came out softer than it felt. He rubbed his forehead with a thumb, a gesture that belonged to a man older than the one who threw loud parties. I did not teach her that. I believed him and did not say so. We stood together until the music inside swelled again. A burst of cheering rolled out to us when someone smashed cake against someone else's nose. Charles lifted his glass as if to drink, then put it down. The question was still hovering between us. "Are you that man, the one who signed the papers?" I looked at the garden. An owl swept through a dark tree and vanished. I did not answer. Silence is not a lie. It is a boundary. When we went back in, the coordinator was lining people up for speeches. Nora was already at the microphone. I watched her place her smile carefully on her face, the way a model places a hat on the exact angle of a mirror. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked her parents for everything they had done. She thanked Ethan for being patient when she was late to rehearsals. Then she looked straight at me. "Family is complicated," she said. "We try to make room for everyone, even when some of us do not fit the picture." She let the words hang there like a painting hung crooked on purpose. A few guests shifted in their chairs. A bridesmaid coughed and looked down. I looked at Ethan instead of at her. He was watching me like a man at a crossroads who wants a sign. I gave him what I had always given him. I kept my face calm. I let the words pass through me like weather. Charles asked for the microphone again as if a note had just occurred to him. He raised his glass to his lips, then lowered it, the motion of a man stopping a train with one hand. "I would like to say something to Henry," he said, and the room turned as one creature. He met my eyes. "Thank you for being here." I heard everything inside that simple sentence. Gratitude, warning, a plea to be careful, a promise to meet again without an audience. Ethan crossed the dance floor quickly and reached my side. His voice was low. "Are you all right?" I answered that I was. He searched my face for a crack and did not find one. "I am sorry," he said. "She gets carried away. It is the champagne." I rested my hand on his shoulder. "Marriage is a long day. People say things in heat they would never say in shade." He nodded and looked toward his wife, and I watched his expression learn something it did not want to know. I moved to the edge of the room and stood near a tall mirror where I could see without being seen. Couples spun. A child slept on a chair under a jacket. A photographer crouched and took a shot of the cake as if it were a landscape. The band leader counted softly and carried the song toward its last chorus. The violinist bowed a note that trembled and found its home this time. The coordinator dimmed the chandeliers a little, and the lights along the garden doors brightened to guide guests toward sparklers. The air filled with the smell of sugar and roses and the faint mineral scent of ice. For a long breath, I felt nothing but the common ache of rooms like this. Beauty arranged with money, joy arranged with lists, people arranged against their better angels. When the sparklers began, I clapped with everyone else and moved out of the way so the photographer could capture the exit. Nora and Ethan ran between two rows of small fires and waved. The pictures would be magnificent. You could not see cruelty in the sparkler light. It hides in the shadows and smiles. I found my coat and stepped into the night. The air was cooler than when I had stood here with Charles. I could hear a single violin warming down inside. The stars were clean and ordinary. I walked along the gravel to the car that had been parked last because it arrived first. The engine turned over with a patient sound. In the rearview mirror, the estate glowed like a memory that had chosen to be beautiful even when it was not. On the drive back to my small hotel, I kept the window open. The wind moved through the car like a quiet animal. I thought of Helen and the way she would have squeezed my hand under the table and said, "Leave it. The night will finish what it needs to finish." By the time I reached the hotel, the laughter of that room had already become grain on a photograph. Morning arrived without fanfare. Pale light slid through the thin curtains and placed a square on the carpet. The room smelled of coffee and clean linen. A bird knocked at the window with a beak that had learned patience. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the small sounds a building makes when it wakes. For a minute, I let myself be only a man whose son had married and whose tie remembered a different life. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen showed Ethan's name and then it showed Nora's before I could answer the first. I did not pick up either. I watched the light climb the wall inch by inch. The violin from last night played again in my head, and it did not crack this time. The day stood still a moment longer, and then it moved, taking me with it toward the conversation I had tried not to start, and the truth I would no longer be allowed to keep. I was not poor, I was invisible, and I preferred it that way. The morning after the wedding, I sat in a small hotel chair and watched the light crawl across the carpet. A kettle clicked off. The room smelled of paper and clean sheets. On the windowsill, the sun made a pale rectangle that shifted a little every minute like a quiet metronome. My coffee cooled beside the bed until the surface went still and thin, a dark mirror that did not mind my face. I took the pocket watch from my jacket and placed it in that pool of light. Helen had given it to me on an ordinary Tuesday because she believed ordinary days held the true shape of a life. The case was brass that had learned to glow from use the glass scratched by years of pockets and keys. When it opened, it made a small sound that felt like a promise kept. I listened to the tick and let memory rise the way steam rises from a cup you have not touched yet. There is an art to disappearing that does not mean running. It means wearing the color of the wall when the room fills with people who clap for themselves. It means answering a question with silence long enough for the other person to hear their own voice and decide they do not need yours. It means learning which chair in a meeting sits just outside the fluorescent circle. It means choosing a reliable car, even when your account could buy the factory. When Helen and I were young, we did not know those rules yet. We were two engineers who believed that if we made something honestly, the world would meet us halfway. We worked late in a small lab that smelled of solder and lemon cleaner. She drew diagrams with a pencil that left a faint shadow of graphite along her hand. I wrote code that hummed in the background while we tested cells that pulsed like tiny hearts. We ate noodles on the floor and solved problems with laughter and stubbornness. The building's night guard called us the last lights and brought us oranges when his wife had too many. The idea came simply as a hinge, a way to let stored energy breathe instead of choke. Everyone was busy racing to add capacity. Helen asked a different question. What if the real waste lives in the leaks? We made a control system that turned those leaks into a trickle you could guide. It was elegant because it was obvious once you saw it. Most good work is. A small company took a chance on our prototype. We licensed it across 3 product lines. Then a bigger company arrived with suits that did not wrinkle and smiles that did not quite reach their eyes. The contract they carried could have paid off our student loans 10 times over. The clause on page 9 could have taken the idea back if the wind changed. We read every line until the day turned to night and back again. Helen circled the clause and wrote a note in the margin that said, "Not worth dying for." We sent it back. They sent a better one. In the spring of 2010, we signed a sale that brought us $25 million and a long silence after the bankers left. People react strangely to sudden wealth. Some run toward the nearest loud object. Some freeze. I stood in our kitchen with a check that looked like a still lake and felt a quiet that was almost fear. Helen poured 2 glasses of water and set them down like a simple ceremony. She said, "We keep our lives the size of our hearts, not the size of other people's eyes." We made rules then, rules no one could see. No new house during the first year, no photographs that looked like victory laps, no conversations with anyone who used the word deserve. Give more than you show. Learn where money hides and where it tries to be seen. If a purchase would change the way we walk into a room, we would not make it. If it would let us sit longer at a table without thinking about ourselves, we would consider it. Ethan was finishing grad school then. He called to say his team had won a marketing case competition, and he sounded like a man who had found his road. We listened and congratulated and did not mention anything about our bank account. A week later, he came home for dinner and noticed a new coffee grinder on the counter. He laughed and lifted it as if it were a trophy. "So you did get yourself a little luxury." I told him that good tools make small work easier. He asked about the lab. We said the project was going well. Lying was not the word I would use for what we did. We told the truth a little at a time to protect the part of him that was still growing. A year later, he asked a harder question. We had gone to see him accept a certificate at a company event. Afterward, a manager shook my hand and said, "Your son has your eyes and your work ethic." I smiled and said, "Thank you." In the car, Ethan watched the city slide by and then he asked Dad, "Why do you never take credit for what you have built?" I kept my eyes on the road and answered, "Because peace is cheaper than applause." He did not understand then. You rarely do until the noise has already cost more than the ticket price. After the sale, we built a structure designed to keep our names out of the papers. Trusts with quiet names. Shell companies with clean books. A holding company that could do the heavy lifting so we could keep walking without a crowd. We chose investments that built rather than burned. A wind farm that needed a patient partner. A medical device startup with a founder who had the stubborn light in his eyes that Helen used to have on nights when the code would not behave. A network of efficient storage projects that looked boring to the fast money and beautiful to anyone who had ever waited for a battery to catch up. The returns were steady because the people were steady. We reinvested like farmers who replant the best seeds. The world rewarded the discipline you could not post on a screen. The numbers grew in the quiet the way ivy does on a wall you do not notice until it has already become a shape. When markets rattled, we sat still and reviewed our notes. When a reporter at a trade magazine sniffed around, we smiled and pointed him toward a public spokesman who enjoyed microphones more than we did. Through it all, Helen carried the pocket watch. She claimed the tick helped her think. She wound it on Sundays while listening to choir practice from the church across the park. We did not buy a new house. We patched the old roof. We did not change friends. We learned to leave early from gatherings where the bragging got sticky. We kept 2 lawn chairs that folded with a click and set them in the backyard where we could watch stars that did not care who owned what. When sickness came, it did not announce itself with fanfare. It arrived like a chair pulled out from under you. Appointments, tests, words that took the air out of a room. Helen kept working as long as work felt like a way to stay herself. On the days when the city was too loud, she sat near the window with tea and a blanket and traced the watch face with her thumb while I tried to read reports that would not hold still. We talked less about money and more about time. We learned that they are the same currency wearing different suits. Before she went, she handed me the watch and said something I had not expected. "Promise me you will keep the plan." I asked what the plan was. She smiled the tired smile of someone telling a secret she knows you already know. "The plan is to be small to the world and big to the few things that matter." I promised. The watch ticked between us like a witness. After the funeral, I made a habit of waking before the sun so that no hour could surprise me with darkness. I took coffee to the windowsill and opened the laptop without sound. Pre-market numbers that looked like the weather. A green line that meant nothing by itself. A red candle that did not ruin a harvest if you remembered what season you had planted in. I learned the names of companies that the world would not learn until later. I met founders in rooms with bad air and better ideas. I listened more than I spoke. I asked, how do you treat your people? And what do you build when no one is watching? The ones who had answers that sounded like math and kindness together were the ones I backed. Ethan visited on Sundays for a while. We cooked and we fixed a loose board on the back steps that had been loose for 10 years. One evening, he told me he had turned down an offer from a friend's father who wanted to bring him into a venture that sounded glamorous. He said it did not feel right. I nodded and did not tell him I had already turned down that father's company from the other side of the table after a single meeting where the man lied twice in 5 minutes without blinking. It felt good to see my son choose a road because it looked true rather than because it looked paved. Some people tried to pull me into the light. A banker offered to throw a party for a milestone no one outside our office knew about. A foundation asked me to sit on a stage and share thoughts about innovation with a moderator who wore a smile like a warranty. I declined with thanks each time. Once a lawyer told me, "You are hard to celebrate." I answered that I find it easy to sleep. I did not set out to buy Beaumont Industries. The file arrived at my desk like any other. Numbers that told a story of a good company steered by a man who mistook loudness for vision. Those men do not ruin things on purpose. They confuse risk with thrill. I saw a way to keep the workers employed and the core mission intact. Meridian Capital made a bid through a shell that kept the attention on the business instead of on the people behind it. The board accepted it because it was the best choice for the company. That should have been the end of the story. It almost was. Back in the hotel room, the watch ticked on the sill. My coffee had gone cold enough to hold a fingerprint that faded and reappeared as the air moved. Ethan's name lit the phone again and went quiet. I pictured him sitting at a kitchen table with his head in his hands while the apartment smelled faintly of flowers from last night. He would be asking questions that did not have clean edges. He would be wondering why I had let a stranger decide the tone of our family's first day of marriage. He would not know yet that this was not about tone, it was about sight. I stood and slipped the watch into my pocket. The weight felt right. The kettle hissed again, and I poured a little water over the coffee to wake it up. The taste was not good, but it was honest. I opened the laptop and watched the morning screen come alive. Tiny arrows, quiet motion, a world before noise. The second hand on the watch lined up with the blinking cursor. Tick. A green number rose by a fraction and held its place. I did not smile. I let the calm do what applause never could. Then I closed the computer and called my son. 15 years of silence built an empire no one could see. I kept it off the radar on purpose. Paperwork did the speaking. Numbers were the voice. If anyone looked at me, they saw a man who liked a quiet table and a reliable car. That was useful. A low profile buys time, and time buys clarity. The morning screen glowed a soft blue in the hotel room. Maps of markets spread across it like weather moving over a country I knew by heart. A chart breathed. A thin line rose and rested. In one corner, a logo pulsed while the feed refreshed. Meridian Capital. I watched the reflection of the word tremble in the dark window and then settle on my face like a question that already knew the answer. The path to Beaumont Industries had not started with hunger. It started with a pattern. In the years after the patent sale, I followed people who built things that did not shine in photographs but lasted in hands. Small storage networks that made neighborhoods steadier. Components that turned waste heat into patient watts. Clinics that swapped noise for care. The returns grew not because I chased fireworks, but because compound interest respects people who do not scare easily. When storms moved through the market, we stayed seated and checked the roof. I learned to keep the structure clean. A holding company with a name you could forget. Several subsidiaries with names a clerk could spell without looking twice. A board that liked spreadsheets more than stages. Lawyers who understood the value of a quiet signature. The goal was not to hide something dirty. The goal was to keep value from being mugged by attention. Beaumont arrived on my desk as a stack of reports that smelled faintly of toner and hope. A manufacturing business in Virginia with good bones and a limp. Revenues were stable. Margins were thin. Debt was heavy, like a winter coat worn into spring. The founder had a charm that aged poorly. The workers still showed up on time and stayed late when a client called with a rush. I read everything twice and asked for the files that no one includes in a pitch deck. Overtime logs, vendor complaints, Injury reports. The truth of a company lives in the corners. James sat across from me that first afternoon with the file open between us. He pushed his glasses up and tapped the debt schedule with a finger. You could live like a king, he said. Buy a vineyard or a team. Dress this up and make the rounds. I shook my head. Kings get noticed. I prefer results. He smiled because he already knew that was my answer. We flew to Richmond without telling anyone who we were. We toured the plant as consultants who liked to ask too many questions. I walked the floor with a manager whose hands were scarred by years of friendly machines that sometimes forgot to be friendly. He talked about new orders and late shipments and the small miracle of a team that still believed tomorrow mattered. The smell of oil and aluminum dust braided with coffee. Over a lunch of paper-wrapped sandwiches, I asked what would make his people breathe easier. He said short lead times and predictable pay. He did not ask for a pool table or a slogan. I liked him immediately. The boardroom meeting came later. A long table. A picture that threw perfect circles of light on the polish. A view that made the city small. Charles Beaumont arrived on time with an entourage of advisors who practiced looking important while saying as little as possible. He wore a suit that had been cut to suggest victory. He spoke of vision and momentum and how the right partner would appreciate boldness. I asked about the covenants on the newest tranche of debt and watched his eyes go flat for a second before the performance resumed. That small flat second told me everything. Meridian's offer went in through a special purpose vehicle with a name that could have belonged to a hiking trail. It was fair. It carried cash and conditions. Keep the workforce. Clean the debt with a plan that does not humiliate anyone. Replace the spending sprees with discipline. Let operations run by people who cared about parts more than headlines. The board argued. Some wanted a competitor who promised flash and not much else. Charles pushed for a letter of intent that would let him save face. I offered a path where he could keep a consulting role and tell a story about stewardship. He took it because it was the path that protected his name and the company at the same time. The day we signed, I sat quietly at the end of the table while the attorneys slid documents back and forth like cards in a careful game. Charles squeezed my hand the way men do when they want to appear generous and in control. He thanked Meridian for believing in his legacy. He did not look at me again. That was fine. My job was not to be seen. My job was to make sure welders had work in the winter and lines stayed moving when a supplier forgot how to deliver on time. Under new management, the company breathed. We trimmed the branches that pulled sap from the trunk. We renegotiated vendor terms without breaking anyone. We set quality targets that made sense and celebrated when crews met them. I visited twice a year and stood at the railing above the floor, anonymous in a hard hat, while the shift lead explained a new line layout he had designed with chalk and tape. He was proud. He should have been. The balance sheet grew a spine. Clients stopped hedging in their emails. The pension fund stopped being a worry and became simply a responsibility, which is what it should have been all along. 3 years later, the file labeled Beaumont in my archive was a neat row of green numbers that rose at a steady angle. I had kept my distance as planned. The brand carried its own flag. Meridian stayed in the footnotes. That would have been the entire story if not for a wedding and a careless toast. In the hotel room, the laptop cast the same blue on my hands that it had cast on 100 mornings. The Beaumont logo sat in a corner of the dashboard. It reflected faintly in the window and on my glasses. I let my eyes rest on it. Somewhere in a plant on the other side of the state, an operator was checking a gasket with a practiced hand. Somewhere a project manager was sending a message that began with the words ahead of schedule. This was the empire I knew how to build. Increment by increment. Year by year, a structure made of paychecks delivered on Fridays and lights that turned on when a worker arrived before dawn. James called. He never said hello when he knew my head was in a spreadsheet. He started with a fact. The market likes what you did with the maintenance schedule. The quarterly note landed. The repair backlog dropped. I told him the operations chief deserved the credit. He said reporters had asked again who controlled Meridian. I said, give them the same answer as always. A group of long-term partners who dislike microphones. He laughed softly. You are a stubborn man. You could live like a king. I repeated the line we both knew. Kings get noticed. I prefer results. We let the silence hang long enough for the truth to settle. Then he asked if I was ready for the family meeting he suspected was coming. I said readiness is a kind word for what we do when we cannot avoid a thing. After the call, I opened the original due diligence packet for Beaumont and scrolled through the photographs our team had taken on the first day. A wall with paint rubbed thin where workers leaned during breaks. A whiteboard with the words, "Fix what we promise," written in a cramped hand. A toolbox sticker that reads, "Do it right or do it twice." I felt something like pride, but older and quieter. Not the kind that needs applause, the kind that lets you put your head down at night without bargaining with yourself. The hook that brought me to businesses like this was never rescue. It was respect. The market notices noise. It undervalues steady. If you can stand boredom and love the method, you can buy rain that turns to harvest. That line of thought carried me to a memory of my father who worked shifts at a place that did not care whether he had a name. He used to say work is a way to be seen without asking. Maybe that is why I liked companies where people made things you could hold. You do not need a press release to recognize a good-fitting joint. I thought of Charles in the garden the night before, the way his mouth shaped the names without sound. Meridian, Beaumont, my name. He had wanted to hate an idea. Now he had to fit a man into that space. I felt no triumph. Only the awareness that the privacy I had planned so carefully had been thinned by a single moment when a careless voice tried to cut me down for sport. The irony almost made me smile. Years of work vanished into anonymity on purpose. One sentence at a wedding pulled the curtain back just enough for the right pair of eyes. I clicked through to the operating account and reviewed cash positions I could adjust if the next weeks required legal muscle or reputational insulation. Not because I feared wrongdoing, because attention burns money quickly even when you do everything correctly. I checked the funding schedule for the scholarship program we had started quietly through an affiliate. More than numbers, the program told me whether I was still who I had promised Helen I would be. The commitments were green and on time. That steadied me more than any performance chart. The laptop screen dimmed when I stopped touching the keys. The room softened with it. I closed the lid. The blue washed out and my face returned to its normal color in the reflection. The desk lamp threw a warm circle that held only the watch and a notepad with 2 lines of handwriting. Ethan. Charles. I traced the names with a thumb and felt the small grain of the paper catch and release like a breath. The lamp hummed. The watch ticked. I sat in that pool of light and the rest of the room went dim as water. Patience is the highest form of power. I had believed that for years and I believed it again. The day would ask for explanations soon. It would ask for a decision about how much to show and how much to keep. For now, there was only the quiet of a plan built with care and the steady weight of a small empire that did not need to be seen to keep people working. I reached for the lamp and turned it off. The blue ghosts on the window faded. My own outline remained a simple figure in a simple chair ready to step into the next room with both hands open. At sunrise, my phone would not stop ringing. My son wanted the truth, but I was not ready to give it. Light pushed through the thin hotel curtains and quiet bars. The room held the cool of early morning and the kettle breathed like a small animal. Steam curled from the mug on the table, then thinned into air. The pocket watch beside it ticked with the patience of a metronome and reminded me that time keeps its own counsel no matter who asks for it to hurry. I let the rings pass. 5 of them. Then another. I watched the caller ID fade and return with the rhythm of a tide. Ethan. Then silence that felt like a held breath. I answered on the 6th call. He did not say good morning. He did not ask if I had slept. He went straight to the dent in the world that last night had left behind. Dad. I need you to tell me what is going on. The kettle clicked as if to mark the start of a meeting. I said I am listening. Where are you? The hotel on Main. The room is fine. Coffee is worse. He did not laugh. His voice wavered like glass under heat. I was pulled aside after the toast. Charles asked me a question. He did not look like a man making a joke. He asked if my father once owned Beaumont Industries. The watch ticked on. I traced the lid with a thumb because the brass always steadied me. I asked what you told him. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. Then I told him I would ask you. He said, "Tell your father he never needed to hide from me." The way he said it felt wrong, like he wanted to be seen forgiving you for something he could not prove. I moved the curtain with 2 fingers and looked at the bright strip of street. People in running shoes cut across the square. A delivery truck beeped politely in reverse. A man in a suit stood alone under a tree practicing a speech into the morning. The world looked ordinary in a way that refused to cooperate with the tangle in my son's voice. Dad, is it true? Were you the buyer? Truth can wait. Pride cannot. The sentence arrived before I chose it. I heard it land on his side and knew it would not comfort him. Pride cannot. What does that even mean today? He let out a breath. I am not a child. If you kept something from me to protect me when I was 20, that is one thing. I am 33. I am married. People from her family asked me questions I could not answer and then looked at me like I was either naive or complicit. I need to know what is mine to carry. I kept my voice level. You are carrying your vows and your work, and the kind of man you have always decided to be. That is already plenty. You do not have to carry my ledger, so it is true. Silence does not only mean yes. Sometimes it means the question you think you are asking is not the right one. I said I am not interested in titles. I am interested in whether machines turn on each morning and paychecks arrive on Friday. I am interested in whether a company built by hand has a path to survive the weather. You know that is how I think. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I also know you dodge when you want to avoid unnecessary fires. I respect that at work. It feels different when I am your son. I let that sit. He was right. Avoiding fires is a habit that walks with you into rooms that have nothing to do with business. Sometimes it saves you. Sometimes it leaves someone else cold. What did Charles say exactly? The words. He pulled me to a corner near the terrace. He asked if you had ever sat in a room with his board. He asked if you had watched him sign something. He kept his voice low, but his face said he had already decided. Then he told me he appreciated any role you had played in keeping the company steady. I could not tell if it was gratitude or a trap. He looked like a man trying to be magnanimous while writing a headline in his head. I pictured Charles by the garden railing, hand flat on stone, the night air around him like a verdict he wanted to draft. I said he is a man who prefers a stage even when there is none. Do not help him build one. That is easy to say when it is not your name being whispered at the dessert table. The frustration rose again. I am not angry that you have done well. I am proud of you. I am angry that I was left blind in a room where I should have been able to see. People ask me about patents and acquisitions as if they knew more about my family than I did. Do you understand how small that makes a man feel? I sat down on the edge of the bed so I would not pace. Yes, I understand. I have felt small in rooms where I owned the table. That is not a confession. It is a fact of being human among people who love to measure. Then help me out of this. He softened. Please. I can help you stand up straight. The rest is practice. Listen carefully. If anyone asks you about me, you owe them nothing but courtesy. You can say my father keeps his life simple and his obligations clear. He supports the companies and people he believes in. That is the truth. If they demand a ledger, remember that curiosity and entitlement wear the same coat. You are not required to hang it in your house. It was quiet again. The only sound was the soft tap of a pipe somewhere in the wall. He said, Dad, did you do this because you wanted to protect me? Or because you wanted to protect yourself? Both. The word surprised me with its honesty. Protecting you from the shape attention can take. Protecting myself from the disappointment of watching money change the way people lean toward you. I kept my face out of photographs because I have learned how expensive visibility can be. The bill always comes late and with penalties. He sighed. I wish I had known the rules of your game before I entered the room. They are not the rules of a game, they are the terms of a life I promised your mother I would try to keep. Small to the world and large to the things that matter. Your name is one of those things. That is why I held it away from the market. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried less heat and more tiredness. Charles is not going to let this go. He wants to know who you are in his story. He wants me to know it too. And Nora. She has thoughts about how families should work when there are resources. She used that word. Resources. I do not know what that means yet, but I do not like how it sounded. I knew then that the next door would open no matter how slowly I tried to turn the knob. Tell me one thing, I said. When Charles asked, did your father once own Beaumont, what answer would have felt like respect to you? The answer that clears the fog without burning the field. He paused. The answer that lets me look him in the eye and say, "My father is not your plot twist. You will be able to say that soon. But hear me. Timing is not a trick. It is an ingredient. If you mix flour and water without waiting, you get paste, not bread. Give me a day." He exhaled. A day. He did not argue. He only asked one more question. "Are you going to speak with him?" "I will speak with whoever thinks they are owed more than the truth deserves. That includes him if it must. It may include your wife." The line went quiet in the way lines do when two people are thinking about the same person from different angles. He said she is proud and precise. Her pride cuts clean. She will not drop this because it looks bad to retreat. Then we will not make it about retreat. We will make it about boundaries. Another quiet beat. He said, "I love her." The words sounded like someone holding something delicate and not knowing where to set it down. Love is the only reason to stand in the wind. It is not a reason to give away your coat. I will call you later today. We will set a time to sit down together. We ended the call without ceremony. The room felt larger. The steam from the mug had vanished and left a ring on the saucer like a memory. I closed my eyes and let the morning catch up. In the space behind my eyelids, I saw Ethan as a boy with a cereal spoon in his hand, asking if the moon could get tired of being followed. He had always wanted answers that fit in his pocket. This would not be one of those. The watch ticked. The curtains breathed. Outside, a truck door slammed and a woman laughed, and then the square went quiet again. I stood and stretched the stiffness from my back and refilled the kettle. The mirror over the dresser caught a version of me who looked exactly like what people are trained to ignore. It was a useful face. It would not be enough today. I dressed and walked down to the lobby for another coffee because the one upstairs had surrendered. The clerk with the neat hair wished me a good morning with a sincerity that did not need to be proven. The street smelled like bread and cold metal. A bus sighed at the curb. I carried the cup back to my room and sat with the window open an inch so the air could remind me to breathe. The phone lit again before I took a sip. A new message pulsed on the screen with the clean decisiveness of a typed agenda. "Lunch today. Family matters. Nora." I placed the phone face down and listened to the second hand travel a few notches on the watch. Truth needed a table. Pride needed a chair of its own. If we were going to eat together, I would bring both and decide where they would sit. She chose a restaurant where the walls were glass, maybe hoping to see me crack. I arrived a few minutes early and stood on the sidewalk to watch the room from outside. Noonlight poured through the panes and turned the tables into small islands of reflection. You could see the whole performance at once, hands lifting glasses, heads tilted toward secrets, a waiter rehearsing charm with a tray in his palm. The city moved behind me like a river that had learned how to wear a suit. I adjusted my tie and went in. Nora had already taken the corner table with the broadest view. She did not wave. She let the power of being seen first do its work. A chilled bottle of water stood beside a red Bordeaux that breathed in the stem as if it had been given the script ahead of time. She had placed a newspaper on the table at an angle that looked careless and was not. The host asked if I would like another chair for the third person. I answered that this lunch would begin with 2. He nodded and vanished. "You came," Nora said. Her smile was precise. "Hope you like the light. It is honest. Light is a tool like any other. It can show. It can be blind." She sat back and studied me as if adjusting calibration. The ring on her finger caught the sun and threw a thin star on the glass. I poured water into my glass and watched the bubbles attach themselves to the side like nervous guests. She began without pleasantries. "Last night raised questions." It did. Some belong to my father. He has always believed that business and family should not surprise one another. She paused to taste the word surprise as if it were a new spice. "Others belong to me. I am the one joining your family. I am the one responsible for planning our future." Our. The word carried weight it had not earned yet. She turned the newspaper slowly and slid it toward me with a fingertip. On the front page, the headline celebrated an acquisition from 3 years ago. There was a photograph from the signing, lawyers, advisors, executives who liked their side of the table. In the back, a man in a navy suit had his head turned away from the flash. The edges of his profile could have been anyone's, and were also mine. "Funny how investors prefer to hide," Nora said. "Funny how curiosity costs more than you think," I said. A server drifted over with a smile that asked permission to interrupt. Nora granted it with a nod that belonged to a person who liked authorizing things. She ordered the wine by name and asked for 2 glasses. I said water was enough. She kept the second glass anyway and placed it near me as if to suggest that my refusal was temporary. She tapped the photograph lightly. The way a cat taps a bug to see if it is still alive. My father has a memory for posture, she said. He remembers how a certain shoulder holds tension when decisions are real. He believes this is you, Meridian Capital, the quiet buyer. What do you believe? I asked. I believe that secrets rot when they sit between relatives, she said. I believe Ethan deserves a clear picture of his family. I believe a foundation could be a way to put those resources to work with structure. She let the word foundation hang in the air like a velvet curtain. I do not recall asking for a curtain, I said. She laughed once. It sounded like a glass kissed by a fork. You have spent years constructing walls with windows, paper windows, shells inside shells. You of all people understand that structure keeps peace. She lifted her glass and took a measured sip. A foundation would shield privacy and lead to grace. Grants, scholarships, a board, rotating leadership, clear votes. She said votes the way a conductor says crescendo. There is a difference between structure and control, I said. One tends to invite the other over for dinner and forgets to send him home. Ethan wants certainty, she said. He wants to know who sits at the table with him. He wants to know where he stands. Ethan wants a marriage that is not built on a spreadsheet, I said. He wants love to be a place to rest, not a ledger to audit. She did not flinch. She changed angles. I studied at Wharton, she said. I know what money does when it is left in the wild. It builds empires for some and explosions for others. Families that fail to plan will plan to fail. Your silence turned last night into a spectacle because silence creates a vacuum and vacuums attract rumor. I am offering a way to fill the space with purpose. The server set down a basket of dark bread and a small dish of oil that caught the light like a coin. I broke a piece and did not eat it. Nora did not touch hers. She went on. I looked up your foundation contributions, she said. The ones that pass through affiliates with gentle names. They are fine. They are also scattered. You could do more with focus. A family fund would allow for scale. It would broadcast our values. Broadcast is a heavy verb for a family, I said. You think hiding is a value, she said. I think privacy is a boundary that allows values to breathe. Nora leaned forward, elbows barely on the table's edge, the exact posture of negotiation. My father asked Ethan a direct question, she said. Did your father once own Beaumont? Ethan could not answer it. I saw the humiliation crawl up his neck. I felt it in my bones. I will not have my husband look small because you prefer shadows. I kept my voice even. Ethan is not small, not in rooms where truth matters. He is learning right now that some questions are not questions. They are invitations to surrender ground. We owe politeness. We do not owe maps. She smiled with no warmth in it. That line sounds wise in a philosophy book. It does not solve dinner. At some point someone will ask again, perhaps at work, perhaps at a board retreat where his name could rise faster if his story were clearer. What would you like him to say? Tell them my father keeps his life simple and his obligations clear, I said. Tell them he supports the companies he believes in. Tell them he does not mix applause with decisions. If they want more than that, they want something he should not give. Nora turned the wine glass a quarter inch, then another quarter. It left a perfect wet circle and made a second one as if practicing a pattern. You are stubborn, she said. I am consistent, I said. Consistency is stubbornness that has learned manners, she said. Here is what I think. You are not against a foundation. You are against sharing power over it. You do not want votes you cannot count. You do not want a board that could outvote Henry Whitaker. She said my name as if testing whether it would break glass. I smiled at the thought of a board outvoting me on my own piece. You give me too much and too little credit at the same time, I said. I am not afraid of people steering a good ship with me. I am careful about who gets the wheel. She slid the newspaper back to her side and took out her phone. On the screen she had cued another image from an online archive. Same room, same signing, a different angle. The shadowed man's profile was clearer. You have an identifiable ear, she said. The tone was light. The aim was not. I let the image sit between us and did nothing with it. The oldest move in the world. Refusal by gravity. She put the phone down and waited for the echo. None came. The server appeared as if summoned by the silence and asked about entrees. Nora ordered seared fish with a list of substitutions that sounded like a legal clause. I ordered soup. "You are calm," she said when the server left. "Either you are very confident or you are betting I will blink." "Neither," I said. "I am not gambling at all. I am letting the truth decide when it wants to speak. It does fine without my rehearsal." She lifted one shoulder. The city skyline cut across the glass behind her like a ruler line. Her voice softened, and that made it more dangerous. "I am not your enemy, Henry. I want to protect what will one day bear my children's names. Your caution is admirable. Your secrecy is not. Secrecy invites myth. Myth invites ruin. Protect is a kind word," I said. "It can mean several things. It can mean shelter. It can also mean control. Tell me which one you mean." She considered the question and took a sip to buy a second. "I mean both," she said at last. "No one guards a house by leaving the doors open. No one builds a legacy by leaving money sleeping." "Money does not sleep," I said. "It dreams. The quality of those dreams depends on who tucks them in. If you push it to perform for applause, it starts telling stories about itself, and those stories demand costumes and a stage. Then you spend more on the stage than on the work. I will not do that." "Ethan will be caught in the crossfire," she said. That seemed to surprise her as she said it. She blinked and the mask slipped half an inch. She loves him, I thought. She also loves outcomes. Both can live in one heart and sometimes they fight. "He will learn to walk in the weather," I said. "I will lend him an umbrella when needed. I will not change the season to keep him dry." The server brought the food. The fish smelled like lemon and a promise to be light. The soup was honest and warm. We ate a few bites with pretended attention, then set our forks down at the same time. Outside, a bus hissed through the intersection. A group of co-workers walked past with badges swinging. The world kept moving. Nora placed her palms flat on the table. "I will ask a simple question," she said. "Did you or your firm ever own Beaumont Industries?" I looked at her. She expected an answer that would drop like a stone and make a ring. I gave her still water. "If you are building a case, then hire your questions a lawyer and let them file the paperwork," I said. "If you are building a family, then stop treating lunch like a deposition." She pulled back as if the chair had changed temperature. "That is unfair," she said. "It is precise," I said. "We can talk about values. We can talk about Ethan and what makes a marriage strong. We can talk about boundaries and what we want to teach any child who may come. But if we talk about corporate signatures, we should all have counsel present and a calendar. I am not interested in mixing those two rooms." She watched me for a long beat. Something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation adjusted for a variable it had misjudged. Then she smiled again, but it did not reach her eyes this time. "The fish is good," she said. "You should try a bite. I am fine with soup." We finished the meal in a truce that had the shape of manners. When the bill came, she reached for it. I placed my hand over hers. "I invited myself," I said. "Allow me." She let the check go with a small theatrical surrender. As we stood, she asked one last question. "What do I tell my father when he calls after this?" "Tell him you had lunch with your husband's father," I said. "Tell him the soup was better than the wine. Tell him you are building a marriage, not a headline." We walked out together. The door breathed a soft exhale as it closed behind us. The street noise wrapped around us like a rough blanket. She turned right without looking back. I turned left and felt the sun find my shoulders. I took the watch from my pocket and checked the time. Then I pulled out my phone and found James. When he answered, I did not waste words. "We need to talk," I said. Then I told him about glass walls, a newspaper, and a photograph that almost touched my ear. She hired investigators. I hired silence. I left the glass-walled lunch and walked 2 blocks to a building that pretended to be ordinary. The elevator moved like a thought up to a floor that smelled faintly of paper and wood polish. His advisor kept his office dim in the middle of the day on purpose. Warm lamps pooled on the table, leaving the edges in shadow, a reminder that light should land where the work is. He was waiting with a stack of folders and a laptop, already awake. The lenses of his glasses caught the screen and turned it into a blue rectangle where his eyes should have been. He said, "You took longer than usual to call. I said she wanted a stage." I let her tire of hearing her own echo. He opened the top folder and rotated the laptop so we were shoulder to shoulder. Spreadsheets blinked alive, bank reports, corporate registries, court calendars that reported only what they had to. He did not waste my attention on decoration. He placed 3 documents in a row. Then he tapped the center one. "She is preparing a case," he said. "Then we will prepare a lesson," I said. He lifted a sheet that listed recent inquiries to financial data vendors. A private firm had purchased access to corporate ownership databases with a pattern of search terms that pointed to holding companies known to sit near Meridian. The firm was good. They left no signatures that could be traced to a client. But the timing matched the week after the wedding. The next document showed credit checks and new accounts opened in Nora's name, unsecured lines at interest rates that assume urgency. The third was a retainer letter logged by a boutique practice that specializes in family asset disputes. Their partners write neat letters and spend their days in rooms that look like libraries and feel like traps. He said she is borrowing against a future she believes she can enforce. I doubt her father is paying for this. The money smells like her own. I breathed in through my nose and let the fact sit. Ambition often borrows before it counts. The warm lamp hummed. The room's quiet made it easy to hear my pulse steady as a small engine that had never loved applause. I asked what her angle is. He adjusted his glasses and the blue rectangle shifted. A demand for transparency dressed as duty. A trust argument. Maybe a claim that Ethan's understanding of the marriage was shaped by omissions about family wealth. The modern version of a dowry grievance. "The word grievance does not fix a marriage," I said. "It buys a microphone. How far can she push without touching criminal nonsense?" He leaned back and laced his fingers. "Not far if we stay ahead. Your structures are clean, your filings are timely. We are allergic to insider temptations and we can prove it. But do not underestimate how loud a well-worded complaint can sound in the wrong hallway. She will begin with leverage. She will try to make you fear exposure more than you fear paying to end the noise. In other words, she will test whether you love quiet enough to buy it." I watched the blue light settle on my hands. To the left of the laptop, he had arranged a map of entities, boxes and lines, plain names that could have been streets in a small town. Everything earned its place by doing its job. A foundation affiliate sat like a soft square in the corner, the one that kept its promises without asking for credit. I traced the edge of that square with a fingertip and felt the grain of the paper raise against my nail. "We create a timeline," I said. "We put the facts in order so that even a tired clerk can see the path. We issue letters to preserve records. We make it clear that we do not intend to fight in the press or in living rooms. We will not speak first. We will not speak loudly, but we will speak last." He nodded with the approval of a man who likes a client with his own oxygen. "I have already drafted preservation notices for the firm she is using and for the relevant third parties. Clean paper has a way of encouraging clean behavior. If she has overreached those letters, make the cost of sloppiness immediate." I asked about Ethan. He said he needs a chair in this, not a sword. Put him in a place where he can tell the truth he owns without guessing at the truth you are keeping. Invite him to listen more than he speaks. Invite him to leave when the room forgets his dignity. I looked at the clock but did not register the numbers. The pocket watch in my jacket was heavier than the wall clock by a mile. I let the difference remind me that time is not a single instrument. It is a band. Some pieces keep rhythm. Some carry melody. Some cover the mistakes of others without complaint. We moved to the second stack. Public liens against Charles had been satisfied last year, but the bank report showed a new pattern. Consulting income spiked exactly when a maintenance upgrade at Beaumont had hit. We both knew what that meant. The company had kept him useful in a ceremonial role. It is easier to pay a man to smile than to explain the limits of his judgment. The documents also showed the estate carrying a mortgage that would not be paid, 80% of the value. Interest floats a little higher each quarter like a tide that pretends it has nowhere to be. He said if your goal were to humiliate them, we could do it now without breaking a sweat. Humiliation is a performance, I said. I do not stage those. I am interested in boundaries. I am interested in consequences predefined and delivered without ceremony. He smiled at that and slid me another page. It was a memo he had written at dawn, precise and brief. Guiding principles for a low-noise response. One line caught my attention and held it. Do not let someone else's urgency become your emergency. I felt the sentence land in my chest like a key turning a lock. We discussed the first moves. A letter to Nora's counsel inviting a respectful conversation about lines that would not be crossed. No admissions, no anger, just a clear outline of what topics belonged in which rooms. If she wanted to discuss family values and the future of holiday dinners, we could meet at a table that held bread and gentleness. If she wanted to depose the Ledgers, she could meet us in an office where everyone wore the right shoes for that floor. She would be allowed to pick one room at a time. She would not be allowed to shout across both. He said, "You will be portrayed as controlling if she wants to play that card." I said, "Control is the word sore throats use for clarity. I will live with that accusation." He sighed in a way that meant he agreed. Then he asked what I intended to tell my son. "The truth I own," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." He closed the laptop with the small, soft sound that always makes rooms feel older. The lamps held the space steady. The folders rested in layers like sediment in a riverbed that no flood had bothered lately. He said, "Do you want me to be present at any meeting with them?" "Not yet," I said. "I will go first with no stagecraft. If they want a performance, we will invite counselors. Until then, I will let silence do the heavy lifting." He stood. I stood. He put a hand on one folder and slid it toward me, a thin packet, public facts and our posture. "Carry this," he said. "You will not need it if the conversation stays human. You will be glad you had it if the room tilts." I tucked the packet under my arm. The weight was not much, but it reminded me of a book I had once carried for Helen on a day when the sky pretended to be kind. The memory arrived and left without taking any more time than it deserved. On the way out, I paused at the window. The city was beginning its afternoon shine. Glass boxes threw light at one another like children dare each other with stones. People on the sidewalk moved as if the ground were a conveyor belt. A bike messenger sliced through without apology. I studied the reflection of my face against the pane. It looked like a man who could be ignored. It also looked like a man who had decided which noises he would answer. In the lobby, I called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I was meeting with people who could turn heat into order. I told him he did not need to defend me or apologize for me. He said he wanted to sit with me before any lunch turned into a trial. I said, "Of course." There was a silence. He filled it carefully. "She is sure of herself," he said. "She thinks she is protecting us." I said, "I know what that looks like." After the call, I walked the block to a small cafe that brewed coffee the way you handle a violin. Patient. Exact. I sat at a corner table with my back to the wall and arranged the folder beside a glass of water. The lamplight here was also warm. My glasses caught the reflection of the open screen as I reviewed a brief note to myself. Do not defend. Define. Do not explain. Clarify. If you feel your breath rise, slow it. 5 in, 5 out. Do not let anyone stack questions faster than you can name them. A text arrived on the table. A simple line with time and place. The hotel dining room at 2. Family matters. I responded with a single word. Confirmed. The trumpet on the cafe speakers laid a long, slow note across the room and let it hang. A bass line walked in behind it with a steady patience that did not need to prove anything. I felt my shoulders loosen one notch. Tranquility is not the same as passivity. It is direction without drama. I closed the laptop and reached for my glasses. The lamps made small, golden pools on the wood. Papers breathed under my hand. The city outside brightened and then blurred as I let my focus move through the pane and out into the afternoon. For a brief moment, I heard the shape of the hours ahead like a score I already knew how to play. Then I stood, tucked the folder, and headed for the door. By the time I reached the corner, the street was a ribbon of sound. Tires on asphalt. A delivery cart rattles. The soft chatter of people carrying lunches back to their desks. I did not add to it. I let the noise pass around me, a river choosing its own stones. The plan was simple and demanding. Honor the rooms. Protect the quiet. Speak once and only when the sentence could carry its own weight. I turned toward the hotel. Somewhere above the sidewalk, a saxophone spilled one more bar of jazz from a window half open, and the note followed me into the moving afternoon. While she traced my fortune, I traced her family's debt. I cleared the small hotel desk and built a quiet command post. Laptop centered, legal pad to the right, phone on silent, the pocket watch on the left where the lamp's circle could hold it. I uncorked a bottle of red I had meant to share with Ethan after the ceremony that never needed to be discussed and poured 2 fingers into a short glass. I let it breathe and have not yet. The lamp spread a warm cone across the wood. Outside, noon softened into afternoon. Inside, numbers opened their mouths and spoke. I began with what anyone can see if they know where to stand. County records do not hide from a calm request. The clerk's search portal loaded with the slowness of a tool that was built for function and survived because of habit. I entered the Beaumont address that had hovered in news photos for years. The parcel number appeared like an old friend who had never learned punctuality. Deeds, liens, releases, refinances. I opened each window and took notes as if copying a map that would be needed later in bad weather. The house had been purchased during a good year, a fair down payment. Then came the upgrades. The second kitchen, the guest wing with a view of the hills, a pool that promised serenity and delivered chemical chores. With each flourish, the mortgage had been rewritten. The current note sat at a number that made my throat tighten for reasons that had nothing to do with money. 80% of appraised value, a floating rate, a balloon clause that assumed the future would be friendly. I printed the summary to a PDF and slid it into a folder marked with the date and a single word. Home. I moved to state filings, a list of entities that wore the family name like a crest. Most were clean shells for real work. One looked like a basket for side ventures that had never chosen a shape. Capital calls posted and missed. I traced payments through public reports and matched them against calendar items I remembered from Beaumont's maintenance program. A pattern brightened. The months when Charles received consulting fees lined up with the months when the company invested in the unglamorous parts of staying alive. Boilers, roofs, safety audits. Retainers are paid to keep a founder useful. I called a number that had not changed in 3 years and asked accounts to confirm the schedule. The woman on the line had a steady voice that lived 2 inches above. Tired. She remembered me as the quiet visitor who always stood on the mezzanine and nodded at good work. She said we cut the check on the first Friday of each month and another at quarter close. I asked if she could send a simple statement of dates and amounts with no commentary. She said of course, and thanked me for keeping the floor supervisors funded when a vendor failed them. I thanked her back and wrote her first name in the margin because people deserve to be remembered with more than a title. I took a sip of the red. It had gone from shy to honest. I set it down and opened the packet his attorney had given me and combined our lines. Credit checks. New accounts opened in Nora's name during the 2 weeks after the ceremony. The balances were small, but the interest rates were not. There was a merchant entry code for a private firm that sells research without question. Investigative work leaves footprints even when it dances. 2 cards showed cash advances that landed on the same day as the retainer the boutique practice had logged. Borrowing against a future return is an old move. It is also an expensive way to buy courage. I called a number in a quiet office where a man with perfect memory lives among old printers and public terminals. He knows deeds like other men know baseball. He confirmed the dates on the refinances and added a detail that the website had buried. A late fee posted in the previous quarter was reversed after 6 days when a wire arrived. He read the note without judgment. I thanked him and felt a tug of sympathy for a household that had built a life on the expectation that the wind would always be at their back. I opened a fresh page and built a timeline. Clean lines, no blame in the ink. First, the year the house was bought. Next, the refinances, each one nudging the ratio closer to a number that makes banks send cheerful reminders. Then the consulting arrangement at the company now ran on discipline instead of rumor. The months when payments arrived. The month the daughter met my son at a fundraiser for someone else's dream. The month the private firm purchased access to corporate ownership databases. The weak lines of credit opened to pay for digging. The day a question was asked near a terrace door. The day I learned that silence can invite both curiosity and cruelty. She did not marry my son. She married a forecast. The sentence came without permission and sat on the page like a weight. I wanted to strike it through. I left it. Sometimes a hard line needs to be seen so you can make sure you do not let it harden your voice. The watch ticked. The lamp hummed. I kept going. I pulled vendor reports that nobody reads unless something breaks. A late payment from the estate's event division to a florist had been posted and smoothed 2 days later by a transfer from a separate entity. I marked it not because flowers mattered, but because cash movement tells the truth when mouths cannot. I opened a list of board stipends for a local arts organization and found the Beaumont contribution listed as in kind, with a note that suggested value to be assigned later. I added it to the pile that described a family living at the edge of a line they had drawn for themselves and then forgotten to redraw. The door between family pride and financial reality is a swinging thing. You can walk through it 5 times a day and still insist it is a wall. That thought made me think of Ethan. He wanted a map that did not make him feel blind. He would soon have one. Maps are neutral. People are not. The email from accounts at the company arrived. I opened it and read without haste. Monthly consulting retainer for Charles. Modest by the standards of men who like to call themselves magnates. Generous by the standards of a firm that used to be unable to pay overtime without borrowing from a promise. The retainer had been my idea. It preserved dignity while limiting influence. It kept him tethered to a place where he could hold a badge and tell a story at dinner without directing a single purchase order. He had every right to accept it. He had no right to build a myth on top of it and then swing that myth like a lantern over my son. I answered with 2 sentences. Thank you. Please prep a straightforward letter for Charles's files confirming the retainer and its purpose to support legacy and transition. Not a threat. A record that would close one door if someone someday tried to open another. The wine glass had left a circle on the wood. I turned the legal pad 90 degrees and drew a box around the word home, another around consulting, another around lines of credit. From each box, I drew 3 smaller arrows. Date, source, contact who can state it without heat. The last arrow took the longest to fill. Contact who can state it without heat. It matters who speaks. Temper ruins good facts fast. The phone buzzed and showed a message from Ethan. Are you coming to lunch early? I told him I would be downstairs 10 minutes before the hour. He answered with a simple good. I sat back and let the quiet rearrange the thoughts that had started to crowd. There was an urge in me to turn the findings into a speech. That urge is a thief. It steals patience and feeds on spectacle. I put it away. This was not a trial. Not yet. It was a table that needed calm hands. I read the timeline again and checked for places where assumptions had tried to sneak in disguised as fact. I removed a sentence that contained a guess about Nora's motive and replaced it with a line that only noted her action. Hire investigators. Open credit. Consult counsel. Actions do not need adjectives. The adjectives will try to write themselves when a listener is unsteady. The discipline is to let the verbs stand alone. I stood and crossed to the window. The city below looked like a set designed to sell a story about competence. Ties straight, jackets uncreased, people moving as if they had always known which way the wind blows. I rested my forehead against the cool glass and thought of Helen winding the watch on Sundays. Promise me you will keep the plan. Small to the world, large to the things that matter. This was not about catching anyone in a net. It was about refusing to be wrapped in theirs. On the desk, the laptop screen dimmed, then glowed when I touched the trackpad. I saved the file with a name that would make sense to a tired mind at midnight. I slid the printouts into a thin folder so they would not puff up and announce themselves. I wrote one more line on the pad and underlined it once. Do not punish. Protect. The door knocked once. Room service offered to take the glass. I thanked the attendant and said I would handle it. When the door closed, the room felt charged like the air before a storm that does not intend to be dramatic. I poured the last inch of red down the sink. The habit of leaving a glass half full is not the same as restraint. I wanted clarity more than I wanted company. I packed the folder into the inside pocket of my jacket and let the weight settle against my ribs. The watch slipped into its place. The lamp cast one last circle on the desk, then gave way when I turned the switch. The room dropped into the blue of the laptop and the soft metronome of the watch. It was enough light to move by. It was enough sound to keep me honest. People who live by assumptions go bankrupt when the truth arrives. I did not need to announce it. I only needed to carry it into a room and set it on the table without shaking. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark. The watch kept time. Then I stepped toward the door and the meeting that the day had been walking me to since morning. They came with folders. I came with facts. The hotel had a meeting room with a long wooden table that smelled faintly of lemon oil and years of decisions. Afternoon light crossed the carpet in tall rectangles and climbed the far wall like a ladder. A car horn on the street below tried to intrude and failed. I took the chair that faced the windows. The chair to my left stayed empty for Ethan. Across from me, Nora sat flanked by her parents and a man with a neat beard who introduced himself with the kind of smile that expects applause. He called himself counsel and adjusted his cuff as if that were a legal argument. Charles folded his hands like a man preparing to bless a meal. His wife kept her gaze where people keep their jewelry when they are not sure who is doing the counting. My advisor set his files down without noise. He took the seat to my right and clicked his pen once. We had agreed the pen would do the talking only when necessary. Silence would do the rest. Nora spoke first. Her voice had been warmed for this. We need clarity for the sake of the family. We need to understand the financial landscape so we can plan the future with integrity. She placed a folder on the table and fanned a set of clippings that showed headlines and faces half-cropped. Names of firms that live near mine. Dates that hovered near the years that mattered. She slid one page closer to the center. There it was again. The picture is from a signing 3 years ago. A profile like mine turned just enough to keep its peace. Her lawyer cleared his throat. The family asks for transparency. Nothing more. A reasonable request in light of the events of recent days. I rested my hands flat on the wood. Your request is to mix 2 rooms that should never share air. If you want to talk about family, I am here. If you want to talk about ownership records, we will choose an office and a calendar. You may not pretend one is the other. That trick is older than this table and just as heavy. Charles leaned forward. No one is here to fight. My daughter is protecting a name. Ethan deserves to know where he stands. Ethan walked in then with that careful step used by men who love peace and have learned that peace can be bullied. He took the empty chair and gave me a quick nod. He looked at Nora, but not for long. His hands were steady. I was grateful for that. Nora drew a breath that sounded like a cue. Here is the simple question. Did you or your firm acquire Beaumont Industries? A yes or a no would be appreciated. The advisor uncapped his pen and set it down again. I looked at the light on the wall until it settled. Then I answered. Today I have only one job, to make sure the right truth speaks in the right room. We are not in an office with stenographers and dates. We are at a table where people who claim to love one another are choosing a shape for that love. So I will not answer your corporate question in this room. I will answer a better one instead. Nora showed her teeth. Better is a generous word. I turned to Ethan. Here is the only truth I owe you in this place. I have never put you on a payroll. I have never asked a board to open a door for you. I have never traded your dignity for my convenience. I have kept a boundary between money and your name because I promised your mother I would. You may not like the way I kept it. You may wish I had handled last night differently. But that boundary is real, and it is protecting you this minute. The room held still while that settled. Counsel's smile thinned. Nora did not blink. I placed my hand on the folder I had brought, not to wave it, to weigh it. We can talk about the record of the past week. We can do that because it belongs here. You started this with a lunch that pretended to be a family meal but was in fact an inquiry. You hired people who specialize in following the paper. You opened lines of credit to pay for that work. You consulted counsel who files suits that break families into pieces and then calls those pieces a plan. Her lawyer lifted a palm as if to stop a train. Allegations will not help. These are not allegations. They are dates and amounts and vendor codes. Your client knows the numbers because she signed for them. Nora crossed one leg over the other and rebalanced her gaze. Research is not a crime. Families with resources have responsibilities. If there is a fortune adjacent to my marriage, it should be stewarded, not buried. If there is nothing here, then you have nothing to fear from questions. She flicked a glance at Ethan. Your son will have children one day. Are you going to hide from them too? Ethan placed a hand on the table. He did not lay it on top of mine, and he did not pull away. He said softly, "We can plan a future without an audit of my father's soul." I opened the folder. I did not scatter its contents. I placed one thin stack in the center. Credit account openings. The timing lined up like fence posts. Then a second stack. Engagement letters to firms that sell asset mapping by the hour. Names blacked out where they should be. Dates leave clean where they do the most talking. Then a single page that held a simple schedule. Payments to a certain gentleman named Beaumont for consulting. Modest sums. Paid on the first Friday of each month, he would recognize the amounts. He had cashed them. Charles stared at the page as if it might volunteer to change. He said quietly, "You did not need to include that. I included it because I wanted to set one thing down gently before others drop it hard. Dignity is not an endless resource. It is paid for, often by the person who never asks for credit." The lawyer unfurled a speech about relevance. I let it end itself. Then I placed the last piece. A printed transcript and a small speaker that fit in the palm of my hand. The advisor set a finger on the volume. I said, "Before I press this, understand that this is not an ambush. It is a mirror. Last week you sent a voice memo to someone you trust. In it you outlined a plan to propose a new fund in the amount of $50 million. Your words were, 'I can get us a seat and a vote. We will build a board that keeps him in the corner.' The person you sent it to did not like the taste of the plan. She forwarded it to someone who also did not like the taste. That woman called my attorney at 7:30 this morning. She asked us to listen before we sat down today. I am listening now." And then I pressed play. The room did what rooms do when sound replaces oxygen. The voice was Nora's. It was confident at first and then quick, like a runner who believes the finish line is closer than it is. She spoke about governance and legitimacy and the pressure of optics. She spoke about a number that would make people take a call. She spoke about influence as if it were a form of love. The clip ended on a sentence that did not need color. "We can use the foundation to set expectations. If he wants peace, he will agree." No one moved. Outside, a siren wound past the building and kept going. The light in the rectangles on the wall shifted a little further up the wall. Nora's chair creaked as she leaned forward. "You are twisting everything." "No, I am straightening it." The words surprised me with how little force they needed. Then I asked the only question that belonged in that exact moment. "Do you love my son or his balance sheet?" Her mouth opened. No sound came at first. She looked at Ethan as if he might hand her a line she could live inside. He did not. She chose a different one. Love and planning are not enemies. They are not. But control and love are. You tried to put a harness on a person and call it care. You tried to put reins on a marriage and call it stewardship. I am not buying the horse. Her lawyer found his voice. This is character assassination masquerading as concern, and recordings can be altered. The advisor slid a short letter across to him. The origin of the file and the consent of the sender were set out in sentences so plain they could carry themselves across any room. The lawyer scanned the lines. He did not like what they said. He liked that they were clean, even less. Charles leaned back and covered his face with his hands for 1 second. When he looked up, he looked older and in some strange way lighter. His voice had lost its stage. He spoke to his daughter the way a father does when he has finally heard the frequency he had trained himself to ignore. You cannot make a home from other people's names. The line shook something in the air and left it different. Nora gathered herself and reached for a familiar weapon. She turned to Ethan. What do you want from me? If your father owns the world and refuses to say it out loud, how am I supposed to build a life with you without guessing? How am I supposed to protect our future? Every day I am expected to smile while strangers treat me like a guest at my own table. She took a breath and aimed again. Your father is buying this moment with shame, Ethan answered before the line could stain anything else. My father is buying nothing. He is spending exactly what he always spends. Calm. You and I promised each other a marriage, not an acquisition. We can still make that. But not like this. Her shoulders fell a fraction. The lawyer shuffled papers, as if shuffling could change the cards. I closed the folder. I did not push it toward anyone. I said, here is where we are. Boundaries have been breached. If we continue in this room, we will talk about care and respect and the future of Sundays. If you want to talk about ledgers, we leave and put on the right shoes. Choose. Nora stood. The chair back hit the table and made a small, hard sound that traveled along the wood. She looked at her father and then at me. There was a moment when I thought an apology might appear. It did not. She collected her folder. Her heels struck the floor as she walked to the door. Each step sounded like something closing. The latch caught and the room exhaled. I took the pocket watch from my jacket. I pressed the crown and the tick stopped. Not to make a point, to make quiet. The rectangles of light had climbed to the ceiling now. I looked at Ethan. He did not look lost. He looked tired and clear. The advisor gathered the speaker and the transcript and slid them back into his case. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had watched cause and effect greet each other without shouting. Charles spoke last. He did not deliver a speech. He delivered a sentence. "I would like to keep my consulting badge if that is honorable." I nodded once. Honor is best when it is simple. We broke the meeting without contact. No one offered hands. No one asked for them. In the hallway outside, the air smelled faintly of dust and air conditioning. Ethan walked beside me to the elevator. He said quietly, "Thank you for not shouting." I said shouting costs interest. Truth pays cash. When the doors closed, the watch in my pocket was still. I did not wind it yet. Some silences deserve their full measure. When truth stands, lies kneel. The day had done that work for us. Now it was time to decide the price of peace and who would be invited to share it. I was not buying silence. I was buying peace. Noon split the room into hard rectangles of brightness and shadow. The blinds were open enough to let the light cut across the long table and lay a white blade through the center stack of papers. The blue ink pen weighted on top clipped to a folder so it would not roll. My advisor sat to my right with his case closed and both hands resting on it. Ethan took the chair beside me and looked at the sunlit stripe the way a man looks at a road he will not take again. They entered together. Nora was in a pale jacket that made the light bounce her attorney, with a posture that had learned persuasion from mirrors Charles a step behind, quieter than I had ever seen him. The door clicked once, and the air settled into the shape of what we were about to do. My advisor began with 3 sentences that contained no adjectives. "Thank you for taking the time. We are here to define a path that ends conflict rather than feeding it. If anyone needs water, it is on the credenza." Nora kept her folder close to her chest. She did not sit until her attorney moved her chair. She said, "We do not have all day." Then she sat as if time belonged to her. I slid the top folder into the light. Harsh noon made the paper look like a slab of porcelain. Inside were 4 pages that could be signed without explanation. A settlement agreement that a calm reader could understand with one pass. A mutual non-disparagement clause that protected everyone from themselves. A withdrawal of all complaints. A separate page that said nothing about affection and everything about distance. I said the number first so that nothing else could be mistaken for the point. 5 million. Escrowed within the hour upon signatures. Full release. No further contact with me. No further contact with my son. Ever. Nora's hand twitched and then went still. The attorney glanced at the first page and then at her. He was doing math the way men do when they know they should not show it on their faces. Charles shifted and looked toward Ethan with a father's sorrow that did not ask for permission. Ethan held his gaze for 1 heartbeat and then returned to the stripe of light. My advisor said the rest in the same steady tone. "All regulatory inquiries you initiated will be withdrawn by the close of business today. All private investigative work will be terminated with written confirmations. You will warrant that you have not shared false statements with any third party. You will agree to a permanent no-contact provision that covers all forms of outreach, including intermediaries." The attorney cleared his throat and tried on a frown. "This is extreme. It is precise," I said. "Precision leaves nothing to argue about later. That is the point." Nora did not move her eyes from me. "This is an attempt to destroy a marriage while calling it mercy. This is not a price. It is a farewell." The words left my mouth as if they had lived there a long time and had only been waiting for a door. Ethan breathed in and held it. His hand found the edge of the table and curled until his knuckles went white. Nora's attorney opened his pen and clicked it twice, a little drum that seemed to steady him. He said, "My client will need to know whether this is your final position." "It is the only position that ends the noise," I said. "There are 2 doors. One leads to years of filings and rooms that forget kindness. The other leads to quiet. Take the one you prefer." Nora tilted her head and studied me. Her voice softened for the first time, and the softness made it sharper. "What do I get besides money?" "You get a life without me in it," I said. "You get a clean departure instead of a long argument. You get to decide who you want to be next without the gravity of this family pulling at your ankles." She looked at Ethan then. There was a flicker there, a history of mornings and shared jokes and a road trip that had made them believe the map loved them. She looked back at me and the flicker went out. "We will need wire instructions," she said. The attorney's pen froze in midair. He had been about to ask for a recess. He was now a step behind his client and he knew it. Ethan turned to me. His voice was not loud. "Dad, did you just buy my freedom? No. I just gave you a choice." He closed his eyes and opened them again. Behind the pane was a line of steel. He nodded once, not to me, not to her, but to the part of himself that had just learned which door he would have taken without an offer. My advisor slid the signature pages into the light. The blue ink pen made its small working sound as it moved from hand to hand. The attorney read the clauses in that quick way that looks like diligence and is actually triage. He whispered to Nora. She did not look up. She signed with an almost delicate motion. Her name lay on the page like a ribbon cut cleanly. The pen came to me. I signed where the tabs asked. My advisor signed as a witness. He did not change his breathing. The room was very quiet until Charles found the voice he had been taught as a boy by people who believed in the usefulness of simple words. He said to his daughter, "This is not triumph." Then he said to me, "I will honor the badge we discussed." It sounded like a promise to bring his own lunches from now on to work and go home without narration. The attorney asked for 10 minutes to send scans. My advisor nodded and turned a folder into a scanner that hummed and swallowed the papers with the appetite of a polite machine. He pressed a few keys. The wire took flight into the network with a note that would arrive and light a screen and confirm that what had been broken would not be argued about again. The light shifted on the table. The white blade moved and the noon glare lost its edge. Nora stood and placed both hands on the back of her chair for balance. She looked at Ethan. She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. The apology she did not say was a shape I will remember for a long time. She picked up her folder and stepped back. My advisor's phone vibrated and he read what it had to tell us. Escrow confirmed. He slid a short confirmation page toward the attorney. He slid a second toward Nora. She tucked it away without reading it. People rarely read receipts for what they think they deserve. Ethan stood slowly. He did not reach across the space to her. He did not look at me for a cue. He simply stood as if a load had been moved from his shoulders and placed where it belonged out of his reach beyond his duty. The attorney gathered his pens. Charles did not offer his hand. He put it in his jacket pocket and looked down at the carpet as if it had been waiting for him to notice its pattern. Before she reached the door, Nora looked back once. Her voice was even. "There will be a story about this. People will say it in all kinds of ways. Let them," I said. "Stories are weather. We are not made of sugar." She considered that, tilted her head again, and then left. The latch caught and made a clean, small sound that carried through the table and up into my elbows. The attorney followed. Charles paused, nodded once to Ethan as if acknowledging a man he finally saw, and went after them. We did not speak for a few breaths. The city hummed beyond the glass. The blue pen lay where Nora had placed it when she finished signing, a little line of ink marking the spot where it had decided to sleep. Ethan sat again and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. I waited. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was steady. "I do not know what I am supposed to feel," he said. "You are not supposed to feel anything on command. Feel what arrives. Give it time." He nodded and let out a breath that sounded like a tire finding a nail and surviving anyway. He looked at the pages that had changed the shape of his life, and then away from them. I asked my advisor to take the copies and hold them. He did. He closed his case and stood. He said, "I will give you both the room." "Thank you," I said. When the door closed again, the air felt different. Not lighter, truer. Ethan stood and walked to the window and put his palm against the glass. He did not speak for a while. I watched his shoulders lower by fractions and then hold. Finally, he said, "How did you know she would accept?" I did not know. I only knew what kind of door money opens when a person is already knocking on it. If she had refused, we would have known something different, and we would have learned to live with that truth too. He turned and came back to the table. He touched the groove where the pen clip had left a dent in the folder. He said, "There is a part of me that wants to hate you for making this so clean. Hate me if you need to. Clean is better than slow pain." He shook his head. "I do not hate you. I am only tired of learning everything all at once." I took the pocket watch from my jacket and set it in the band of light. The face caught the noon and made it gentler. I wound it once and felt the spring tighten and then give. The tick returned to the room and made a modest claim on the space. My advisor knocked and came back with a short printout that the bank had sent. He placed it on the table without comment. Ethan glanced at it and then pushed it away as if it might stain him. "Enough paper," he said. "Enough," I said. We stood and gathered nothing. The room looked the same as when we had entered, except for the marks left by the pen and the warm divots where elbows had pressed. As we reached the door, Ethan stopped. He said, "I am going to file tomorrow. I will ask for an end without a war. I will tell the truth without theater." "That is the only way to do it," I said. He gripped the handle and looked at me one more time. "Thank you for choosing the door." I could not. "You would have," I said. "You were not given time. That is all." He nodded. Then he turned the handle. The door closed behind us with a sound that felt like a lock finding home. 15 years of careful distance did not disappear. They clicked into place. The hallway smelled like dust and air that had been filtered 1,000 times. We walked without speaking. At the elevator, he pressed the button and the light came on. He looked at it and then at me. He said, "I will meet you for coffee in the morning." I said I will be there. The elevator arrived and opened. We stepped in. The doors slid shut. Somewhere inside the panel, a mechanism found the floor and decided to move. The ride down was smooth and quiet, the kind of quiet that does not need to be bought again. At sunrise, my coffee did not taste like revenge. It tasted like freedom. The window in Santa Fe breathed in the first light and gave it back as a soft gold on the floorboards. The cup warmed my hands. The pocket watch clicked a small, brave rhythm on the sill. Lavender in the yard lifted its purple heads to a breeze that smelled faintly of dust and bread. The world did not know what had been signed or unsaid. It only knew that morning had a job to do. So did I. I had come here with a single suitcase and the watch in my pocket. The desert sky made room for thoughts without turning them into sermons. Sunlight met adobe and did not rush. People walked their dogs early and waved to strangers as if the gesture might keep the day honest. In this town, a man could be a man without needing to be a character. That felt like a gift I had finally earned by putting down a load I should never have carried as far as I did. I found a small house with a yard that did not pretend to be more than it was. 2 rooms for living, 1 for sleeping, a kitchen that took joy in quiet work. I planted the lavender myself because Helen had once kept a pot of it on the fire escape. I set a wooden bench where the morning could find it, and I let it find me. The first week I slept longer than I expected, and woke without the ache of future engines waiting to be fixed. The second week I walked to the farmer's market and learned the names of tomatoes. The third week I set up the fund that would carry her name into rooms where young engineers were busy being told their ideas were too small for the world. I used 1 clean account and 1 clean sentence, a grant for minds that build patiently. The work was simple on paper and complex in all the ways that mattered. I read applications at the kitchen table. I met finalists in borrowed classrooms where chalk dust lay on the ledge like harmless snow. A boy from a dusty town brought a prototype that hummed like a content cat and promised to keep a rural clinic cold when the grid forgot how to love it. A woman who had worked nights in a warehouse set down a design for turning wasted heat into a trickle of useful current and spoke with the same cadence Helen used to have when an equation finally admitted what it wanted. I listened and asked only the questions that make ideas stronger. Do you understand why this will break in the real world? Do you know which failure you are willing to own? If they answered with humility and a plan, I sent their names forward and slept well. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a student whose hands shook on the page. He wrote that the grant paid his way out of a shift he had taken only to keep the lights on. He wrote that his mother cried because someone believed before the world did. I held the paper and felt the old ache under my ribs turn into something kinder. Grief had not left. It had learned new manners. On Sundays, I walked to a small chapel with white walls that did not apologize for their plainness. I sat near the back with the watch in my palm and let the voices of people who did not know my name wash the week from the corners of my mind. After the service, I carried boxes of groceries to trunks and listened to stories I would never repeat. A man recovering from surgery showed me his scar with the pride of a boy who had fixed a bicycle chain by himself. An older woman told me the peach tree in her yard had chosen to bear again. I learned that victory comes in shapes that do not trend. Ethan called the first morning after the documents had been processed and asked if I could meet for coffee. We chose a place with a courtyard and a fountain that behaved like a small, polite child. He looked rested in a way I had not seen in months. He also looked like a man who had been asked to redraw the border of a country on his chest. We sat with our cups between us. He did not race to fill the air. He said, "Can you just be the man who taught me to work hard?" I said, "That is the only man I ever was." He smiled and it reached his eyes. Relief is not loud. It is a shoulder that moves 1 inch lower and decides to stay there. He told me he had signed papers that made the ending official. He used simple sentences. He did not dramatize what did not need it. He said, "I am learning to like quiet." I said, "Quiet is generous when you earn it." Weeks turned like pages. The fund made its first 2 awards. A basic lab in a community college gained a shelf of instruments that knew what they were for. A craftsman who had been repairing other people's machines for 20 years finally built his own with a hinge that refused to complain under pressure. When their thank you notes came, I stacked them without ribbons. I did not frame anything. Paper knows its place and fulfills it without applause. One evening, Ethan called to ask if we could have dinner on Thursday. He wanted me to meet someone. His voice held a careful steadiness that told me he had invited the right person and was waiting to learn whether I could meet her without making the meal about anything but the meal. I said yes, Thursday is good. We met at a small place on Canyon Road where chuckling servers moved like water and the walls held paintings that had learned to be art without asking permission. He arrived with a woman whose posture said teacher before her words did. She wore simple earrings and a cardigan that looked like it knew how to be washed. Her name was Lydia. She shook my hand without trying to read my resume on my face. Humor lived at the corner of her mouth and did not show off. We ordered plates meant for sharing, and the table gave us its honest light. Ethan watched us the way a bridge watches a river. He wanted the water to flow. He did not wish to direct it. Lydia asked me about Santa Fe. She asked about the grant in a way that respected the work and ignored the numbers. She told me her 5th graders had just finished making shoebox solar ovens and that every child had learned 3 new words: radiant, reflective, conductive. Then she laughed at her own list and said they also learned patience because an oven made of foil and hope needs time. I asked how she handles a child who rushes the way adults rush stock tickers. She said I put a sticky note on their desk that reads, "Do the problem in pencil first." Then I bring an eraser big enough to make them laugh at the idea of mistakes. She said I tell them that in my classroom insight counts twice and speed counts once. I liked that very much. Ethan relaxed into his chair, 1 vertebra at a time. When the check came, I reached and then she stopped herself. She said, "Next time let me cook." The word next made something open in the room. Ethan did not flinch at it. He wore it like a jacket that finally fit. After they left, I walked home under a sky that looked like velvet touched by desert hands. The watch ticked in my pocket. The street smelled of piñon smoke and quiet confidence. In the yard, the lavender waited, and the bench accepted the weight of a man who had put down too many burdens too slowly and had finally learned to set one down while it could still be set gently. In the weeks that followed, I kept my promises to the fund and to the mornings. I did not count the number of times I had escaped a story by telling a smaller, true one. I only noticed that sleeping came easier and that coffee did not need to be strong to tell me the day was meant for us. I wrote a letter I never sent to Helen and told her that keeping the plan had been the only way out of a maze built by love and fear and old habits. I told her the watch still ran and the lavender kept faith with the soil. One Saturday we held a small gathering for the first grantees. No speeches. A pot of stew, a table that knew how to catch elbows and not complain. The boy from the rural clinic brought a cooler and showed us a temperature strip that had stayed blue all afternoon in heat that would have mocked blue a year ago. The woman from the warehouse came wearing a dress her sister had sewn and carried a part she had machined herself. She held it out like a person offers a newborn to a room of friends who will protect it by simply saying yes. Ethan and Lydia joined us and washed dishes with the easy choreography of people who have understood that the fastest way to love a place is to help it clean up. As the sun lowered, neighbors drifted past and waved. Music wandered from a porch down the block. Lydia taught the youngest grantee how to tape a poster so it would not curl when the air shifted. Ethan filled water glasses and did not look at his phone. I watched the light slide across the table and catch the rim of a bowl. I felt no urge to stand and be noticed. I felt the old urge to make sure everyone had enough bread. That felt like power. the sort that does not demand receipts. The next morning, the sky came up clear and quiet, as if it had slept well too. I took my coffee to the bench and sat with the watch warm in my palm. A hummingbird came to the lavender and held itself in the air with a fierceness that looked like ease. The wind moved through the yard on soft feet. In the distance, a train called out and then listened for itself echo back. I thought about anger and how it shrinks a room to the size of a wound. I thought about peace and how it gives the room back its windows. My phone buzzed once. A text from Ethan. Brunch next Sunday. Lydia will make a pie. Can you bring the watch? I typed yes and set the phone face down. I wound the watch and listened to the tick deepen. Time accepted the offer. Morning accepted mine. I do not know what stories are being told elsewhere. I no longer measure my days by whether rumors can swim. The revenge that tempted me was loud and would have won applause from people who enjoy applause more than they enjoy sleep. The answer I chose looks plain. It is a garden, a bench, a watch with a faithful heart, a fund with a simple charter, a son who learned that dignity can be signed into place, and a woman who teaches children to use pencils first. The sun cleared the roofline and found the surface of my coffee. Steam rose and unstitched itself into the air. I breathed in. I breathed out. I let the light say what it always says when no one interrupts it. Live well and let light answer. Then I stood, walked the small path between the lavender, and opened the gate to a day that did not require anything of me that I could not give. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.